Welcome into another edition of the James Boyd Podcast. Of course, I am your host, James Boyd, joined by my beautiful, handsome, amazing co-host, Jim Ayello.
Wow, that was great. What did I do to deserve
There
that?
you go, man. You're a great
I
human. That's all it takes. That's all it
I
takes.
appreciate it. I feel like you though, because I'm looking at my hair. I'm like, I need a haircut. My
Oh
wife's
man,
gonna do
I'm
it for me
rough.
later. So like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. This is not a visual podcast yet, but yeah, we'll see if I work on that this offseason. But for now, we are both looking like we just roll out of bed to get this done. But we are dedicated to you all, our listeners. We got
yeah,
lots to discuss, Jim. And I guess we'll start with the fun thing that everyone does every offseason, and we
yeah.
all get married to our picks, and we all say this is the right move, this is what's going to happen, and then for some rhyme or reason, it doesn't happen that way. And we're talking about, of course, mock drafts. I have my first one due for the Athletic this week, and I enjoyed it. It was fun. I think I had a different spin on it than perhaps other ones that I've seen, and so I guess we'll start with that, Jim. And I know you had to edit this story yesterday, but just your
Yeah.
overall reaction to my picks. I put my GM hat on, and I was trying to be like Howie Roseman and get the Colts to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I'll do. I'm gonna do this. I had a fun way of thinking about this. I'm gonna do one pick I love, one pick I don't like, and then one pick that I think is like really interesting.
Let's do it.
Um, so I'm torn on the love. I think your first two picks were exactly where the Colts should be looking. Now you could even flip them. Like you could go corner first or safety first and do a tight end later. And I know that's like it's a deep tight end class, so I like the idea of you can wait if you needed to. However, we've talked about this on a previous pod. I think anybody who's been paying attention to the draft or watches college football realizes how special of a player Tyler Warren can be. I think anybody that runs the way he does with the ball in his hands and can do the amount of things that he can do, like he can fit almost into any offense. You can imagine it with any offense. And the thing you alluded to, though, and the thing I think even Dane Brugler, our draft guru here at the Athletic, has alluded to is the Colts kind of need an over the middle presence who's not Josh Downs, who is very good, but somebody who can create a little bit more with the ball in his hands, who can be a bigger target for Anthony Richardson, because obviously we know he's a little scattershot with his passing. So bigger 6'5", sorry, 255-pound target over the middle. I love it. I also love that you referenced the fact that you would have had a little bit more trouble taking Warren if Malachi Starks was sitting there.
Yeah.
Can you? What was your? I'm actually curious before I get into the other picks. Like when you're watching, it was Pro Football Network, so shout out to them for doing the cool mock. But like as you're watching the picks pop in, what was your like gut when you saw Malachi Starks go? Were you like, dang, or were you like, oh,
Yeah.
just as long as Warren's there, I'm happy? What was kind of the thought?
I believe they had Malachi Starks going like the top 10. And I
Okay,
was like, I don't know if that happens when the real draft rolls around. And obviously it comes down to positional need. But if you look at the big
sure,
board that Dane Brugler does, like he's very high on Malachi Starks. And,
yeah,
and I ended up, I guess I'm giving away a little bit of the end of this story. But at the end, I mentioned, hey, I know safety is a big need for this team. But
right,
I was thinking if it's not Malachi Starks, I would probably prefer to go after a veteran safety. Like I could have chosen Xavier Watts. I could have chosen some other safeties. But in my mind, I was thinking, let's just address some of these needs that might be more beneficial to do it in the draft
yeah,
and then lean on hopefully a different approach in free agency from Chris Ballard. But yeah, Malachi was the one that I was kind of torn on. And, don't get me wrong, there were others like, you know, I think I said this on Twitter the other day or last week sometime, but my big three, because someone asked for it, was like Tyler Warren, Will Johnson, and Malachi Starks. Will Johnson, I don't think will be there at 14. Like he's too good of a player,
yeah,
plays a premium position at outside cornerback. I think he might
yeah.
potentially be a top 10 pick. So if those two guys are gone, then I'm like, all right, I understand I could go and get, a really good cornerback still in the first round. I can go out and get a really good, defensive player still. But to
Hmm.
me, it just felt like this made too much sense. And I don't want to be the team that passes on, potentially Brock Bowers 2.0. I'm not saying he'll be that productive in his first season. Wouldn't expect that at all because Brock Bowers had an all-time great year. But
Yeah.
if he is like a future Pro Bowler and someone who can be a future star, which many project him to be, then I think you have to take that swing because not only of his positional value to your team, but because of the other changes coming to your team. Like you don't know if Wally Cox is going to be back. You don't know if Colin Granson's going to be back. I mean, you have to decide if you want to bring those guys back as well. So I think he addresses a lot of big needs, and he's also potentially at that point the best player available.
So you and I were talking before we started recording. about, and this is not something we haven't talked about on the podcast, but we were once again discussing the Eagles offense and how much we want to see the Colts kind of lean into some of the things they do. Some of the things that the Eagles do are throw a lot of passes behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of screens, and a lot of things to like Dallas Goedert, and they ask him to kind of create after he's got the ball in his hands. Again, Tyler Warren is like almost like a running back. I mean, obviously he's a supersized running back with the ball in his hands, but that is kind of what he does. He's going to make picking up, as opposed to a 3 or 4 yard screen, he might get 6 or 7 yards and make your 2nd and 3 or 3rd and 3 that much easier to pick up, especially for a guy like Anthony Richardson who can always just run for that himself. So I just like the type of guy that Warren is in terms of just making Anthony Richardson's life a little bit easier, and I think we can't lose sight of that. This whole offseason is that the offseason has to be about making Anthony Richardson's life easier, or you can phrase it differently, making him work. Like it has to work in order for this regime to succeed or stay here, because I think we're getting close to the end if Richardson doesn't work out. So Warren is the type of guy who does that. I have one other question for you about the first round before I get into the pick that I didn't love as much, which was, did you consider an offensive lineman? Because we're going to get into the cap cuts and some of the guys that you were talking about in that story, I should say, Braden Smith being one of them. Did you consider a tackle? I mean, or are you happy going in with Gonzalez and Ryman at left tackle, right tackle going into the year?
Yeah, I thought about that. I did, and I was like, man, am I being a little bit too beholden to the guys that I've just heard their names pop up over and over again? Like, am I too enamored with those guys? Am I being a little bit biased with that? Because obviously, I think often when people do mock drafts, unless it's like painfully obvious, like the Bears, for example, they should draft all offensive linemen. Like, most people aren't trying to choose offensive linemen in their, big boards. And so I did think about that. I know one of the ones that I thought about, in the second round was Tate Ratledge, the right guard from Georgia.
The guard, yeah.
They also had some offensive tackles you can consider. I think, Will Campbell will be gone when it comes to tackles. But, our man Membo, like, is he around at that point in the draft? Like, do you consider, taking a guy like that? I think he is a left tackle, so probably not. But, looking at other guys when it comes to offensive tackles, Josh Simmons, Ohio State, like, I did think about that because there is some uncertainty there. And the way this all kind of breaks down is, and this is why often mock drafts get a little bit better for everybody when we get closer to the draft, it's because free agency comes first. And so I'll be excited to kind of see what the Colts do in free agency, because we should see some movement. Like, usually all the big moves by most teams come within a short windows, or days long window in free agency. Now, it can linger for a little bit, but most of the bigger name players get snapped up pretty quickly. And so then you can kind of decide from there, okay, well, the Colts address this need, in free agency. They re-sign Will Fries, or they sign a right tackle that I'm not aware of or something like that. Then I'll be able to know. But I did think about it for sure, Jim, because in my mind, I'm like, all right, say I still choose Tyler Warren. That second pick, it might not be bad to go offensive lineman, mainly because we talked about, I get it. You want to give Lou Anarumo the chance to be dynamic with his defense and the chance for that defense to obviously take a step forward. But as we talked about previously, Jim, if you hit on Anthony Richardson, and by hit, I mean if you surround him with all the pieces to succeed, and he looks night and day from last year to this year, then you can kind of forgive whatever happens defensively. Like, he'll still get criticized for whatever pitfalls defense has, but believe me, that would be a job-saving, job-insulating move if Anthony is just better. If he's just better overall, I think not everyone, but most people in Indianapolis would just be happy with that.
Yeah,
and then everything else is like gravy.
That's why I've said throughout the offseason that I want this to be the offseason that is dedicated to make Anthony Richardson work. However, you can't ignore the defense. Obviously, Lou Anarumo needs some pieces to make it work, which is why I think you can probably do some things in free agency to address those needs. Like you said, safety, getting him a really good safety, an above average, upper tier type safety in free agency seems like almost feels like a no brainer at this point, honestly. And they do have the cap space, and we'll get into that in a little bit, to go after somebody like that. James wrote a great story on 10 targets they should have, plenty of DBs in that list that you should check out. But the way you did it too, you kind of hedged, not hedged. I guess you kind of played both worlds, right? You drafted tight end first, you drafted a cornerback second, try to inject another little young talent into the secondary room. Hope this one works out a little better than some of the other picks that he's made in the past. Like, I do think this feels like a very Ballard pick. It was just taking kind of a tall, big corner in the second round. So I think they should again try to maybe get a veteran, but you don't have to go spend as big on a veteran, I would think, in free agency. Maybe if you got a guy like Travarius Ward, again, somebody who popped up on your list, that would be interesting, and you don't feel as compelled to try to add somebody in the draft here. But I did like the pick. It does feel very Ballardy. He has the size and skills. Do you want me to take a shot at saying this kid's name, or should I?
I want to say it's Azariah Thomas.
Azariah? Okay, Azariah Thomas. Okay.
Yes. Now,
okay.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
if those listening, Azariah fans, please forgive me. But I believe that is the correct pronunciation about it. That's the other benefit, seriously, of the combine. Because when you go in person,
you learn how to say some. Yeah,
you learn the names, and everyone has a placard, and they all talk to us, and we get to understand them on a deeper level from that human standpoint. So I'm looking forward to that too, because there's so many names that I always I'm like, I don't know, like, is this right, is this wrong? And I think that kind of humanizes them a bit when we can kind of just talk to them face to face.
For sure. I like the pick. This seems like a guy who would be very good in the running game. And help. I'm with 6'2", 190. Young guy, he's a junior coming out of Florida State. Like, it all kind of fits what I think Chris Ballard typically targets. Now, that might not be a good thing. I think last year going into, it must have been April or May, where you wrote that Chris Ballard was going to rely on his young corners, and you were like, I don't know if that's such a good idea. You kind of went through the list of all the guys that he has drafted, and most of them haven't really panned out the way you'd hope. However, doesn't mean this guy won't. I want to get into I think I teased it long enough. The pick I didn't love as much is the TreVeyon Henderson pick in round 3.
I can understand that. I understand.
And you did, like, your people should go read it, obviously, but the way you wrote it was like, I know people won't love this, and I was like, I'm one of those people. I don't love it, but your reasoning was fair. Don't get me wrong. Like, your reasoning is good. They do need another running back. They need somebody they can trust who can spell Jonathan Taylor. I even like the fact that you target a guy who is I wouldn't say a third down specialist, because he can do other things, but he's a great pass catcher and he's a great pass blocker, which again is something that Jonathan Taylor is not. He's not a great pass catcher. He's a fine pass blocker. He's not really great. Like, if you could stick this guy in there on third downs, which is what the Colts want to do anyway, they want to take Jonathan Taylor off the field on third downs. You saw it plenty with Trey Sermon this year. That's when he would come in a lot of the time.
Don't
Tyler
remind
Goodson.
me of the Green Bay game. Lord have mercy.
But they stopped taking him off the field, and I get why. He's obviously one of your most electric playmakers, but there are downsides to that. And in this case, you found a guy who could kind of mitigate some of those downsides. If you put him in on third downs, he will be an upgrade over what Taylor gives you in clear passing situations. That said, it's just a little higher than I wanted to go. So I don't mind a running back in this draft. 4th, 5th round, fine. And find a guy who has that skill set. It's just they're a team that I feel like is not good enough to take a running back in the third round. Does that make sense? Like, it's not quite a luxury pick, but it almost feels like a luxury pick. And they already have Jonathan Taylor. It's literally just the value. It's not even the player or the position. It's just the value. I don't know. How did you feel as you made the pick? Did you feel good about it, or did you? I don't know. Where were you on it?
I felt pretty good about it, but there was some trepidation, because I'm like, man, that's kind of high for a running back. And I think more realistically, to your point, Jim, that they would consider doing it on early day 3 versus day 2. Yeah. And I probably would too, but I was like, I'm not a real GM, so let's have some fun with it. But the premise of it, I think, kind of stands, where I do think they have to draft a running back. I don't see them going out and using free agency money or cap space on a running back to back up JT, when you can see year in and year out, you can draft really good guys in the later rounds that are productive rookies. And again, you're not even expecting him to come in and be one of your main guys. You have that in place. You have one of the top 5 running backs in the league, I would argue. And now it's just supplementing him and to hopefully keep JT fresher. Like, that's the underlying part behind all of this. Now, I get it. I think TreVeyon Henderson alongside JT will be a dynamic 1-2 punch. I think their games complement each other very well. But the underlying issue is that you cannot expect JT for like the last month of the season to play almost every single snap. And yes, he was balling out. He had huge numbers, and I get it. Save for Denver, which was, a heartbreaker. He played extremely well, but you just can't put that on a running back and who's getting older and things like that and expect him to hold up through 17 games. Like, you need some of that relief on your body. And so I think they need to address that position very seriously because it was very weird. I mean, after he came back from his ankle injury, I think JT missed about 3 weeks last year. When he came back, they were like, all right, well, Trey Sermon, thank you for your services. Tyler Goodson, thank you for your services. You're not touching the field again with this guy. And I think that kind of speaks to how one-sided or lopsided it was. And so I can agree with that. It's probably a little bit too early. I do think that, this is where you asked about offensive linemen. Would they go offensive lineman here and then perhaps go a little bit later with the running back? But, I probably have more mock drafts to do as we get closer to the draft. So I'm sure I'll explore those options myself. But, yeah, I can agree with that. It's just, again, and I tried to explain this in the story, which I hope you all read and enjoy. It was, making the pick, which is always fun. But then explaining the reasoning, which I think should be a greater team approach overall anyway. And so that's kind of what I was thinking. But when I did it, I was like, you said about running backs and whatever. And I understand. I get it.
You said it at the start of of your description here. This may be too early for the Colts to draft a running back, and so again, when I saw Travion Henderson there, my gut reaction as I was editing it I was like, it's a little early. And then the first sentence was like, it's maybe a little early, and the explanation made total sense to me. I would want it to be a little bit later, but I guess devil's advocate, look, like Jonathan Taylor is 26 next year. I don't think that means he's fallen off a cliff. In 2026, he'll be 27 years old. Still don't think that means he's fallen off a cliff, but it will be the last year of his deal. And there is $13 million in cap savings if you were to move on. Now, I don't think that's the plan. I think if Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen are still here, that means Anthony Richardson had a good year, which probably means Jonathan Taylor had a good year, and they plan to keep him. However, if you're going through a regime change, I could absolutely see him, the new GM or new coach, saying, let's start over. Let's get a little cheaper at running back. Maybe trade Jonathan Taylor or move on from Jonathan Taylor. And it would be nice to have somebody in the pipeline. Now, again, that's not something I think Chris Ballard is planning for. I think they're planning to be good with Jonathan Taylor for this year, next year, and maybe even beyond, because I think running back lifespans are lasting a little bit longer than they had it in previous years, but maybe not that much more. So, again, I think getting somebody in the pipeline makes sense. I just think it's a little early. So, the last one I wanted to point out, and I think I think you guys know, you can get an insight into the way I read some of James's stories is by the headlines, because usually that's something I'm in charge of, and we obviously collaborate on it. But I obviously highlighted Will Howard on your first pick in day 3, the quarterback from Ohio State, which, by the way, you did. You just leaned into the Big Ten, by the way. Tyler Warren, Travion Henderson, Will Howard. And then you drafted a Minnesota edge rusher, John Joyner, in the 7th. And I was like, man, all the people in Indiana are going to love you for just drafting Big Ten. I love that.
Look, man, I'm sick of that SEC bias, okay? I'm sick of it. I don't want to hear anything about the SEC and the hypothetical wins and how they're so much better than Indiana and their other programs in the Big Ten. I don't want to hear it. All of you all let me down in the make-believe bowl that you all had. So I don't want to hear it.
I guess I think people in Indiana appreciate it, and Ohio State is your champion. So taking players from the Big Ten makes sense.
I mean, look, when you take players from championship teams, cough cough, Philadelphia, it might not be a bad idea. I'm just saying.
So Will Howard, again, it's something that James and I were talking about before the podcast. It's less about Will Howard than the concept of taking a quarterback on day 3, or even, a 3rd round pick, I suppose, if somebody was really appealing to you there. But it's just putting somebody in the system, letting them actually have time to develop. I want you to explain your thinking here, but your reasoning. But I think the idea is this is not to replace going after a veteran quarterback to provide Anthony Richardson with real competition. This is, in fact, adding more competition and then giving yourself a potential out if Richardson doesn't pan out the way you'd hoped.
Exactly. And ever since I think we talked about it on the podcast, actually, might have been last week, recently, or either in our phone conversations, but I have been obsessed with this idea ever since. And it's funny because I was just on 107.5, 93.5 The Fan yesterday, co-hosting with Kevin Bowen, and one of the listeners threw that idea out there as well. And we were like, man, this might be an underrated move that we just haven't really talked a lot about. So I'm glad we're talking about it here. I do think this would be an ideal offseason for the Colts. You work with Anthony, and he's got a lot to work on individually, and you stay on him, and you stay as close as you can. There's NFL rules. Obviously, you can't do certain things with certain players, but I would imagine they're going to be in constant contact with him over his offseason. And then you supplement that with the contingency plan of, okay, we go out and get a veteran. And for those who are like, I hate all the options, that's what happens with veteran quarterbacks who are on the open market at this point in their career. None of them are going to be great. And then lastly, you boost the room and perhaps in that case, say goodbye to Sam Ehlinger and bring in a QB3 that could be a realistic part of your future. And I think that they've done this in the past. I think Sam was kind of like that. It's just that with a 6th round pick, it's very rare that guy becomes a guy. I mean, we're still asking if Sam is a legit backup, let alone, a starter and something like that. That's like, seems like an extreme long shot and something that probably won't happen in his career. But with Will Howard, I mean, I looked at the experience he had in college, physical tools, 6'4", 235, dual threat. Like, he fits that modern style that we see in quarterbacks. He fits what you all want to do at the quarterback position. Probably a little bit older than you want. He's going to be 24 before the NFL season begins. But, I mean, sometimes I think we get a little too caught up with the age thing where it's like he's only 24. Like, he's not going to, he's not 28. You know what I'm saying? So we saw Michael Penix Jr. get drafted, and obviously he's a better player, and he was pretty old, and he got drafted. Now he's like the guy in Atlanta. So I think that it would just be wise to do this because let's just throw it out there. Okay, Anthony doesn't have a great season 2025, but your record isn't awful either. So what are you doing? Like, you're going to draft a quarterback at, I don't know, 17 in the first round, and you're not doing that great, or you're going to draft, like, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me to kind of think of it from that perspective because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So if you do draft a quarterback, you kind of control your future a bit and have more of a say-so in what it looks like with someone that you believe in, truly believe in, and try to hope to develop into being, if he's not your guy down the line, at least a backup or something like that. Like, it's worth taking a swing. And I think that that's a move that the Colts have to seriously consider because we truly don't know. And the number one thing, and I'll end it with this, Jim, is just I fear going back into that cycle of, okay, Anthony didn't work. Let's say you throw in, you sign Daniel Jones or Justin Fields, and one of those guys ends up ending the season for you. They start the last 9 games, 5 games, whatever the case may be. But they don't play all that great either. And then it's like, all right, well, we don't have a young pup, in developing on our roster that we're going to believe in for next year. And we kind of just have to go check the veteran free agent market again and see if we can just tread water until we figure out a real plan. Like, that is not enticing to me at all. I almost feel like at that point, I'd rather just play the young guy. In this case, it'll be Will Howard in 2026 and see what we got and then figure it out from there versus, oh, man, Anthony didn't work. Justin Fields didn't work. And all right, who's the free agent this upcoming offseason in quarterbacks? All right, let's pick one of these older guys again. And that doesn't sound very interesting to me at all. And I will say, I know Jeff Saturday threw this out there on Get Up the other day, Aaron Rodgers to the Colts. Let's not do this, okay? Let's not do this. That's not part of my QB plan at all. So Will Howard in, perhaps, yes. Aaron Rodgers would not touch him with anything. Ever. Wouldn't even touch down to Indianapolis if I was Colts. No, not happening.
I think Chris Ballard spent a lot of time talking about wanting to create a better culture. I'm not sure Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career is that kind of guy that you want to.
On a tangent,
I don't think he.
Did you see Diana Rossini's reporting for us at The Athletic where she had the scoop where they met with him, the Jets brass met with him in New York, and they were like, hey, here's our stipulations if we want to keep you here. And one of them was he couldn't talk on the Pat McAfee show every week. I thought that was hilarious.
Can you imagine doing that in Indy?
I know.
Indy, he'd be impossible, right?
You could just drive down the street. And so, I digress.
Yeah, it's not. I would be stunned if that's something Chris Ballard decided to do. He just does not. At this point, Aaron Rodgers, I think, is going to be a non-starter for quite a few teams in the NFL, given his track record at this point. Of disturbing the culture in certain buildings. I guess the only question I have about it, and I do like the concept, I truly do. The only question I have about it is, do you think this regime is feeling the pressure of trying to win now and is thinking about the future in that way? Like, do you think Chris Ballard is thinking, if it doesn't work out with Anthony Richardson, I have a backup plan in place, or at least, a shot at a backup plan? Because obviously a day 3 pick on a quarterback is far from a guarantee. or even a third round pick. But do you think he's thinking about the future in that way, or do you think he's focused on trying to make this year to win? Because he's feeling the pressure, and he said he's not going to treat this year any different than he has in terms of the way he approaches the job, urgency wise, I guess. Because like obviously he said he's going to change the way he approaches free agency and some other things, but I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm just curious. Do you think he's going to be thinking about, okay, I got to set myself up for 2026, 2027, or is he going to be more dead set on trying to make 2025 work? I'm not saying there's a right answer to this. I'm just curious what you think.
Great question. I think he should probably go all in on winning now. I would.
Okay.
Like, and I can only speak from my perspective. I would lean more towards I'll use that fourth round pick on a guy that could probably help me right now.
Okay.
Versus
Or like
down the
yeah,
line.
like trading for somebody maybe like a four.
Yeah.
It could be. Yeah. Okay.
Something like that, because
Yeah.
the knock on ballot is like, when have you ever just gone for it? And that's the thing that we haven't seen. It's always kind of been like halfway in, halfway out. We're feeling things out. We're kind of
Yep.
moving in the right direction, but we're kind of not. And so it's like, when are you going to actually put some skin in the game? And to do so, you kind of have to stick yourself out there. You got to kind of walk to the ledge and look over and say, all right, if this doesn't work, then, I get the boot. And so I truly think that this is one of those instances where we could see him be a little bit more aggressive for his own sake. And it's probably for the better. So, yeah, I like that bird's eye view you kind of just gave of him, where he's at. And yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it either way, but that is a question he has to kind of answer then, because if you do take a quarterback in the fourth, fifth, whatever round, just to take a quarterback in general, it doesn't matter what round, we will be asking, okay, what does this mean for Anthony Richardson? What does it mean for the future? Why'd you do it? And, if you're saying, well, just in case it doesn't work, we ain't trying to hear that. So that's a catch-22 for a GM. And so it's a tough one, but I do think that, again, this is the bed you kind of made for yourself when he just hasn't worked out, and you're weighing options that, quite frankly, just aren't that great at the moment. You don't have good options. And we've talked about it in the past. Like, if the Colts had a top 7 pick in this year's draft, are we not sure they're taking a quarterback? Like, that changes things drastically. I think they're kind of sticking this out because they don't have good options, and Anthony is their guy. But believe me, the NFL is cutthroat. If they could have gotten a different guy, would say they had a number 4 pick, believe me, I think the quarterback will be very much high on the list. So we'll see. We'll see. That is interesting to kind of throw out there. But like I said, I'm kind of married to the idea at this point. I'm like, man, I really like that plan, just because you just don't know with Anthony. But the last thing I'll say is with Chris Ballard, if it doesn't work, man, I probably won't be here. That's kind of my thinking now. It comes down to Jim Irsay and whether he likes him and if he wants him to come back. Because as we've seen, Chris Ballard has 9 seasons now with the Colts. But, I mean, you gotta, what they say, scared money don't make no money. Like, you gotta place a bet on somebody, something to get you really forcefully in a new direction versus what we've kind of seen in the past, where it's like the Colts go 8-9, 9-8, 7-10, whatever, and they're just good enough to kind of get your hopes up during the season, and then they're just bad enough to kind of leave you hanging when it comes to actually winning the games that matter. So,
I think you're probably right, but I do think like it'd almost be a tell, right? Like during the draft, if he takes a quarterback on day 2 or day 3, it would just feel like, okay, he feels very secure in his future in Indianapolis, versus if he doesn't, not to say that's a tell that he's, on the hot seat, but I think that's one of those tells that you could say like, oh, he's taking a quarterback. He thinks he's going to be here a little longer. Whether or not that's true will be interesting to find out. So let me ask you last before we kind of finish up the mock draft here. Was there anybody on day 3 that you were particularly happy to land outside of Will Howard? I know that only leaves you with 3 picks, but you went to or does that only leave you with 2 picks? No, 3. I'm sorry. You took a linebacker, an offensive lineman, and an edge rusher, which again feels very Chris Ballard. Anybody that stood out to you? And again, you guys should all go read James's reasoning here, but just wanted to ask that last question.
Yeah, I thought Utah linebacker Lander Barton was an interesting, prospect just because he's a rangy guy, high
Okay.
motor, can kind of get solid on the sideline. And I would expect, again, I didn't put this in the story, but great, we have a podcast to talk about it. The Colts will pursue another linebacker in free agency too. That's
Not your,
rangier, perhaps.
what about Jermaine Pratt? I
I
know
don't
you
know.
were.
Trading for a linebacker, and I get it for those listening. Jermaine Pratt,
I had to bring it up.
yeah, top dog, top linebacker, or one of the leaders in the linebacker room for Cincinnati has axed out,
Yeah.
and he's close to Lou Anarumo. So some people are like, what does that mean for the Colts? I don't think they're going to trade for a 28-year-old linebacker. But I loved how you kind of phrased it yesterday. Was like, it's not Colts news.
Yeah.
So it's worth, I guess kicking the tires on just to kind of see, what it would take to bring him to Indy. But I don't think the Colts would invest any draft capital or relinquish any, players for that player when you already have Zaire Franklin on the roster. You're paying him a good amount of money. And at this point, you're probably thinking, do we draft a linebacker? Do we turn to Jalen Carlisle, who's our pick from last year? Do we, get somebody in free agency that could really, boost this linebacker room? Those are all the thoughts that kind of went through my head. But I do think that it wouldn't be a Chris Ballard draft if, like my last three picks kind of showed, he didn't draft at least one offensive lineman, one linebacker, and one defensive lineman. So, again, feel free to check that out. Share your thoughts. Like I said, I'm not, super duper, stuck on one pick, one player. You have to get this one.
Yeah.
Obviously, in this case, Tyler Warren will probably be like the one that rises above the rest in that thinking. But even then, like I said, if Malachi Starks is there, that's a guy that I would seriously consider taking even
Heck
over,
yeah.
Tyler Warren, just considering that there's other tight ends you could probably pick up in the second round. And so I encourage you all. There's a lot of good content, I think, out from us lately. Me and Jim have been at it when it comes to, hey, here's a list of free agents they could target. Here's a mock draft. Here's, I think I have a list of 20 players from my big board. So feel free to explore that and kind of get yourself, prepped for what should be, fun, busy few weeks here when the combine starts up. Not weeks, but a few days. And I would probably die of exhaustion if the combine was, weeks and weeks long. But it'll be a fun week, singular for us to kind of get to know these players a little bit more. Like I said, catch up with Chris Ballard, talk to Shane Steichen, talk to others around the league as well, and to kind of get a sense for what the Colts are going to try to do when it comes to some of their big decisions and big moves, starting with free agency in March, and then obviously the draft in April. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the big question kind of leading into that is how much cap space are they going to have in free agency, and obviously, are they going to spend big in free agency? I still find it hard for me to wrap my head around Chris Ballard spending big in free agency. Like, even if he gets one big name, kind of a thing, like I would be like, okay, that's it, that's all he's going to do, because I know Chris Ballard, and I've covered Chris Ballard for a long time in my career, and it's hard for me to believe that he would do it. However, your other story, one of the other stories that you wrote this week, was about the Colts cut candidates and how they can free up a little more cap space. Right now, they're estimated to have about $28 million in cap space. That's over the cap's estimate, usually a good estimate, but they're projecting the increase in the salary cap going into this next season. The NFL hasn't released what that actual number is, so it is still an estimate, but around 28 million is what they have. But what I found interesting as we were kind of going through your story was that they make a few cuts, and they can get real interesting in terms of how much money they have. So right now, I think they're like mid-pack at 28 million, with a few cuts that make a lot of sense. And other teams will make cuts too, but just to give you a gauge, if they got to 60 million, and we can talk about some of the guys, but if they get to 60 million, they would be about seventh in cap space in the NFL. And again, other teams will make cuts too, and that'll fluctuate, and it'll depend on what the number is and things like that. But they should have plenty of room to operate and make moves. And for the ninth time in this podcast, James put some targets out there. So if you're interested in who they should go after, we talked about it a little bit last week, but that story is out there as well. But I did want to dive into at least two of the guys that you thought the Colts maybe should move on from. Like, we have to kind of, with the caveat with Braden Smith, is obviously we don't know what he's going through personally. And as you wrote, well, I thought we can empathize with whatever it is. But in terms of football, and the Colts have to be thinking on that level. Like, it's going to be really hard to keep him on the roster with about a $20 million cap hit when you can get out for essentially $3 million in dead cap, save about $17 million. And keep in mind, like, his $20 million cap hit, at least according to Spot Track, makes him a top 20 paid offensive lineman in the NFL. Braden Smith's a good player, but I don't know that you'd consider him a top 20 offensive lineman in the NFL, and I don't know that you can pay him that much money. So maybe it's a restructure or some sort of extension or something like that, but the cleanest way out definitely seems to be a cut and freeing up all that cap space. So, when you were looking through this list and you're looking at Braden Smith, did it just jump out like obvious, like that's going to happen, or how did you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's very obvious. I think if you look at our list, other lists from other outlets, if you just Google, Colts cuts potentially 2025, I think Braden Smith is the name that'll pop up the most, just because of the money, the unknown when it comes to his personal matter, the fact that even before this past season, his body was kind of breaking down a little bit in 2023, where he had missed a lot of games. And he is, I will say, someone who is very respected in the locker room. We've seen him play through so many different things to be out there for his team. And all that in mind, it's still a very cutthroat league when it comes to this stuff. Like, there's been plenty of players that have been cut or released or whatever the case may be, even after they've given everything to a franchise. I'm not saying that he's some charity case because, knowing Braden over the last few years, I don't know him very well. He's not, a super open guy, but having talked to him, numerous times after games or after practices, he is someone who doesn't want like pity. He's someone like, hey, I signed up for this. I've been paid handsomely to do my job. I've done it to the best of my ability. I can live with whatever happens. It's just that looking at, what things they could do to free up more cap space, that seems to me like something that would be a no-brainer for them, quite frankly. And it is the easiest way to clear up the most cap space, because everyone else on this list, we're looking at cap savings that I had Samson Ebukam, I had Raekwon Davis, I had Tyquan Lewis, and I had Rodney Thomas the second, which we'll get into a little bit. But even all their, potential cap savings, if you combine them, is only a little bit more than what you would get for one player when it comes to Braden Smith. And so that's why he's probably number one on my list of guys. And at that point, that's why we were having that conversation earlier about the draft. And it's like, do you trust Matt Gonzalez? Like, do you trust him enough to hand him the keys and say, you're our starter going out? And they did that in the past with, Bernard Ryman, and he ended up being their left tackle of the future. So it's not impossible. But it is one of those things where you have to really trust what you see in Matt Gonzalez, really trust that he can be the guy. And then one thing that I want to throw out to you, though, was, I think Samson Ebukam is another one that we could see them move on from, just because the Achilles tear, his age, his position. He's going to be 30 in May, coming back from an Achilles tear, going into his final year. And he has a let's call it $10.5 million cap number. Dead money's $3 million, and he could save $7.5 million. That to me is another one that kind of seems more likely than not. But the other ones, I think, Raekwon Davis, perhaps. I didn't love the signing last year. I didn't love that he didn't really do much last year either. I think that Chris Ballard probably wanted more out of him as one of the bigger free agent signings that were not retained players by the Colts. Tyquan, I think, is probably going to stick around. He has a $7 million cap hit, 2.5 in dead money, and then, potentially 4.5 in savings. I just don't see them moving on from Tyquan, because you have to have some depth. That's the one thing that I kind of have to remember. You're going through like potential cap cuts and, talking about drafting guys. It's like, well, you still have to meet your salary floor in 2025, and then you still have to like have some depth. And I know Chris Ballard is huge on keeping that depth. And so,
for sure.
Assuming that Dayo Odeyingbo is not retained in free agency, then it's probably wise to keep, Tyquan or Raekwon or somebody around that can give you that depth going into the final year of their contract. The one that really shocked me that you pointed out, I want you to get your thoughts on this, was Rodney Thomas II. Like, when we were going through the list on Over the Cap, and shout out to them and the work that they do, they are great when it comes to cap numbers. So if you all ever get curious like me, I am not a genius. I just literally type in overthecap.com and you can get all the information you want. This one really shocked me. And I get it. He's a 7th round pick, but to see $24,000 is all the dead money, and it's not a typo. Like, that's all the dead money he will be owed. and you could potentially save 3.36 million if you cut him. I mean, that's another one, Jim, where I'm curious, like, what would you do in a situation? Like, is he sticking around? Like, especially because you want to upgrade at safety anyway.
Yeah, no, that's it. I'm taking his money and I'm putting it toward a safety upgrade. And again, if you're going to pay for a Javon Holland or Justin Reed or somebody like that, it's one of the top tier safeties available. It's going to take a lot more than $3.4 million to do it, but that'll put a big chunk into it. Honestly, like if you're going to pay $12 to $15 million a year for a safety, $3.5 million's going to go a long way. I know it sounds small, but it's going to go a long way. And I think you can't count on him going into next year being anything more than depth. And again, this team needs impact players. And you've written about it, I think, 5 times at this point since Lou Anarumo's been signed. They need an impact player at safety. Nick Cross is coming along and had a good season, and I think you can be very excited about his future. But I do think you need a veteran that has some experience in different schemes, playing multiple schemes, and can do the things has the IQ that Lou Anarumo needs to kind of teach his. It's a complex system. I don't think he'd hide from that. It's tough. So I would want somebody who I know could play at a high level with a high IQ. And not to say that Ronnie Thomas isn't, but I'm not sure he's the caliber of player that they're looking for at that position. So yeah, I'm definitely making that cut to try to save some money on upgrading at safety. And yeah, just to go back, like I'm with you. You don't want to lose all these defensive line depth. Obviously, it's very important to Chris Ballard, but Dio Dengbo is probably going to cost more money on the open market. I think just because of his age, I think teams are going to be more interested in him, and the Colts aren't going to want to spend that much money on him.
Yeah.
So and Ebukam to me is an easy cut. I not to say he's a very productive player when healthy, but coming off an Achilles at his age, I don't think you could take that risk. It's too much money. So I think you have to move on from him.
About, not to cut you off, which people say when they cut you off. It's so ironic. But and this to kind of throw this in and let you get back in it. But the Achilles tear, even if he is going to be that player again, like pre-Achilles tear, it usually takes the year after you come back, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So like I wouldn't expect him, like he's healthy now probably, or he will be healthy by the season, but he won't be himself again probably until about 2 years removed. And that's usually the case, at least and I'm not some doctor, but just in the players that I've seen. We saw with, Dial early on in his career. We saw with Julian Blackmon. We've seen it with other players where it's usually that year after you come back when you really regain all of your mobility and things like that.
I completely agree. And they don't have, we just talked about the urgency Chris Ballard has to operate with. I don't think they have the time to wait on that. And I wouldn't. I mean, the odds of him coming back and being the player he was after this injury at age 31, I mean, when he is like 2 years removed, it's just not a bet I'm willing to make. So Tyquan, I think, comes back. At least that's just my opinion. I think I got to cover Tyquan Lewis. You got to cover Tyquan Lewis. People love Tyquan Lewis in that building. He is versatile. He can slide inside and out. He's good against the run. He does give you some pass rush. I think you said last year that he had some suitors in free agency. I think other teams were interested. I think they keep him. So Raekwon becomes the one that is tough. Gut reaction, I was like, yeah, cut him. Like, you save the money, move on. But as you pointed out, you can't lose Dio and Ebukam and Raekwon probably. And,
exactly.
It's a lot. It's a lot. So maybe you hang on and hope for a better season. He did not play well last year. I mean, you saw with your eyes. I'm looking at PFF numbers that tell you this exact same thing that we all saw, which was that he did not make an impact even when he played in limited snaps behind Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner. So again, my gut would be to move on and say find somebody better or cheaper, but they maybe just hold on for one more year and hope he takes a step forward and is a little bit better this year. But yeah, I mean, all of these guys, I kind of, like I said, other than Tyquan, because you only say, I think we didn't say the numbers. You only say $4.5 million. Dead money's $2.5 million. It's probably not worth it given what he gives you.
Yeah.
And his spot in the locker room. Like, I think, again, we've talked a lot about the importance of making it a better locker room. Tyquan Lewis is the type of player who makes it a better locker room, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to get rid of that guy like that. So, but I mean, honestly, everybody else on this list, even the tight ends, you mentioned some of the other guys. You can kind of go into those tight ends, but
yeah, I mean, real quick.
I think most of these guys you move through. Yeah.
Yeah, real quick. Jelani Woods, Drew Ogletree, each aren't owed very much when it comes to dead money. And so if you move on from either or, you could probably save $1 million a piece when it comes to them and cap savings. Now, the question becomes, would you move on from Mo Alley-Cox, Colin Granson, Drew Ogletree, and Jelani Woods all in one offseason? Probably not. You need some bodies in that room outside of, Will Mallory. But I do think that, if they were to move on from Drew Ogletree or Jelani Woods, I wouldn't hate it. Like, I probably keep Drew around. I'll probably lean more towards Drew just because we've seen him. And he is a decent blocker, big body, things like that. Whereas Jelani, he hasn't played in 2 years. And
Yeah.
the weird thing, not weird thing, but the thing is kind of like the EJ Speed thing when it comes to the age. Like, I didn't realize
Yeah.
EJ is going to be turning 30 soon. Like,
Yeah.
Jelani and Ogletree are going to be 27 this year.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like it because there's like their first contracts, but they're older prospects anyways coming out, and we haven't seen it. So it's like, how much upside is really left in a 27-year-old, who either just hasn't been productive or in Jelani's case hasn't been available. So we'll see. But I think of this list that we have, the top 5 on this list, there's a good chance we could be saying goodbye to like 3 of them. I think that's a solid, thought process.
I would be happy to have Mo back. I think as a again locker room leader, good blocker, but not to be counted on as your tight end 1 or even maybe your tight end 2.
That's the thing that always irritates me when we talk about Mo Cox. And I get it among the fan base. You're frustrated with the lack of production and the lack of what we actually see when it comes to pass catching tight ends. But Mo is fine. Like, his role, he's being asked to do more than he should at the position. But he's a fine tight end. If, like you said, he's not your number 1. If he's your number 2, you're okay. Like, and you're definitely okay if he's number 3. But if he's your number 2, and the things that he does well, he blocks pretty well. He's a big body. He does have timely catches in key moments. Like, he's fine. It's just that, I think to sort of put it into more tangible terms, if you have Tyler Warren and you have Mo Cox in your tight end room, those are your top 2 guys, you're fine. I think you're fine.
Yeah, you feel good.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the biggest thing is when I push back on the Mo Cox, it's like, get him out of here. He doesn't do anything. You're asking him to do stuff that he's physically not capable of doing. He's not a super crazy, run after the catch guy, a lot of wiggle to his game. And no, that's not him. He's a kind of, old school tight end who will give you that ground and pound when you got to, move the ball with Jonathan Taylor, and he'll give you an occasional big catch, which is fine. He's not getting paid a ton of money anyways. Like, that is fine. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out for sure.
Yeah, and again, to be clear, Mo is an unrestricted free agent. He can choose where he wants to go, and I think you've written about it that he wants to win at this point in his career. He doesn't have that much longer in the NFL at his age, so if he decides he wants to go somewhere else, that's obviously his call. But if I'm the Colts, I try to bring him back, not at a very high price, obviously at a pretty low price, but I definitely would want to bring him back just because I think he is a respected veteran in the locker room. Mm-hmm. I think he is. You want some continuity maybe in your tight end room, especially if you're going to move on from the guys that you talked about cutting, which I think, the Colts aren't going to pinch pennies, but they need a roster reset in a lot of spots, and they need to spend some money on some quality players in different spots. So if you can save a little bit of money on those guys and bring in some cheaper, if you end up drafting a Tyler Warren or somebody that you expect to kind of be your tight end 1 rather quickly, you can move on from some of these guys. So it's I'll say big picture wise, Chris Ballard is very, very conservative with his contracts. The way he structures them, he usually front loads a lot, so they pay up front and then get out when they need to. But typically, you don't see the Colts moving on from guys before their contracts expire. I just think it's not something that they've done a lot of. But this year might change things. Honestly, I'm looking at some of these guys, and it's just I think you have to in a few of these instances to one, to save money, but two, just to. Again, to save money, to bring in better competition in other spots. So it should be an interesting offseason. I really do think this is going to be outside of Chris Ballard's comfort zone a little bit, which is moving on from players that he's paid and going a little bit bigger in free agency. So it should be a fascinating offseason for Chris Ballard. He said 9th year. I don't think he can totally change stripes. I don't think that's who he is. Mm-hmm. I think the reason he is Chris Ballard and the way he got to where he is because he does things the way he likes to do them. But I do think he is going to be a little bit different this year. It's going to be fascinating to watch him. And again, we'll find out soon. Like, you want to move on from these guys. One thing we didn't talk about was kind of the post-June 1 thing. They can split the money between 1 or 2 years. Like, if he's trying to win this year, he's cutting these guys before, pre-June 1 and getting that money that he can spend in free agency because that is where he needs to spend it is now. So, like I said, I'm fascinated to see what Chris Ballard's going to be like this offseason because I do think he's going to have to operate outside of his comfort zone a little bit.
Absolutely. So we'll see. I'm excited about that. And on the last note, This is when me and Jim will have to take our medicine.
Oh yeah.
Super Bowl.
Shoot, I was hoping you forgot.
Oh, no. And I was at home. My dad was cheering for the Eagles. Obviously, I chose last week on the podcast. Me and Jim actually chose the Chiefs. And
Yeah.
we could not have been more wrong. I mean,
Nope.
my goodness. For those of you who are super into, Indiana high school athletics, I liken that game to watching a Class 6A program just beat the, crap out of a 2A program. It looked like Philadelphia was in a different weight class, Jim. So
It did.
I was shocked. I figured, Philly had a good chance to win. They had the best team on paper, roster wise. And we both said that last week.
Yeah.
We thought, okay, Patrick Mahomes, they've been there, the experience, but to just get destroyed because the final score wasn't even that close. And it wasn't close in the final score either. Like 40 to 22.
And they had garbage time touchdowns.
I know. That was a beat down. So what was it like for you just seeing just the absolute butt kicking we saw in the trenches that obviously led to a dominant Philadelphia win and Nick Sirianni, former Colts offensive coordinator, being crowned a champion.
Super Bowl champ. Yeah, I would say part sad and part shocked. The sad part was, again, I just like watching history. So I wanted to see the three-peat because I don't think we're going to get to see it again. It's funny. A lot of people are talking about the stakes going into the game and who had the most pressure on them. And I am the entire time I was saying the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. I know that sounds weird because they were the back-to-back champs and, this should be all gravy. But, like, unless something shocking happens, this is it. That was it. Like, that's the last chance you're going to have to go 3 in a row because it's so hard to win one. It's almost impossible to win 2. And as we just found out, it is apparently impossible to win 3 in a row. So I thought the pressure was there on them a lot to make history happen with the one shot. Like, it's not one of those things where you can come back the next year and try it again. You literally, it's literally a 3-year thing you have to do to try to get back to where they were. So
I know.
I was sad we didn't get to see it. And then the shock part of it comes in. I knew the trenches were going to be a big part of this. I thought the Chiefs defensive line did fine. They actually held up pretty well against the Eagles offensive line. They contained Saquon Barkley for the most part. Obviously, they gave up some points. I expected them to give up some points. The Eagles offense is filled with talented players. What I was shocked was the way the Eagles defensive line manhandled the Chiefs offensive line. I obviously, going into the game, thought advantage Eagles on the D-line, but I didn't think it was going to be, like you said, just like beating the doors off of and getting to Patrick Mahomes and rattling him by the end of the first quarter. I mean, the guy had happy feet. I think at like the third series, he was dancing around back there like he didn't trust his offensive line, nor should he have. So that part was surprising to me because I think we'd seen the Chiefs hold up better against some good defenses, and we'd seen the Eagles' defensive line been obviously incredibly disruptive, but the Rams were able to move the ball. The Commanders moved the ball a little bit, like they did okay in those games. I just didn't think they would be that overmatched, and it was just a butt whooping up and down the field for 4 quarters. Frankly, like they just got after Patrick Mahomes constantly. I mean, everybody has seen it now. They didn't even have to blitz. They didn't even have to blitz.
6
and when you don't have to blitz,
6 sacks, no blitzes.
That's it. That's the game. Like I didn't even listen to I love the Athletic Football Show. I listened to Robert Mays and Derek Klassen all the time, but like I didn't even have and I still did. But I didn't really have like the eagerness to listen after a Super Bowl to like what happened, what did they see? Give me the analytics. Like I knew what happened, I saw what happened. It was very obvious. The Chiefs' offensive line could not hold up, and that was the end of the game. That was it.
All I know is I was thinking if I was Cooper DeJean, you couldn't tell me nothing. Pick 6 in Super Bowl on my birthday. Oh,
against Mahomes?
Against Patrick Mahomes. Go who? I'd be talking so crazy. They'd be like, this dude he better retire now. Because I'll be telling Patrick, yeah, you're old, bum and this and that. I'll be talking so crazy, which is probably why God didn't give me that talent, because I would not be humble at all. Oh, are you kidding me? My head would be inflated to the moon. And I heard his post-game interview, and it was so funny hearing him talk like live on TV. And he's like giving you the most rudimentary answers. Happy to be here, trusting my coaches. And I'm like, you just won a Super Bowl as a rookie. Pick 6 against Patrick Mahomes to basically end the three-peat. Brother, talk your stuff. And so that was cool to see. But then what I loved and was kind of seeing the NFL films, those little breakdowns, the quiet moments that we didn't see on air that we saw later. Like after Jalen Hurts threw that touchdown to Devontae Smith, his offensive line is saying, "I love when they doubt you." Jordan Malato's like, "I love when they doubt you." And he's like, and I think it might have been Lane Johnson walked up to him and was like, "They can't F with you." And he's like, "I know." And I'm like, "Dang, I do know. I know now." Like, I mean, what can we say? What can we say about Jalen Hurts that we haven't said? And to kind of put a Colts bow on this, I think what they've built over there in Philly is ideally what all teams want to do, but particularly when it comes to the Colts, you have your dual threat quarterback who can get things done. And I think that's the biggest thing with Anthony. Can you make the throws? Because Jalen went from being a guy who got benched in the national championship because he couldn't make the throws to now being a Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, because when they called him to throw the ball, he made it happen. I mean, keep in mind, Saquon Barkley was held in check. He didn't have 100 yards. He wasn't even close to 100 yards. And so to see Jalen time and time again make those throws was huge. So you want to see some development from Anthony in that area. But the overall build of that team, investing in the trenches, the offensive defensive line, being just bigger and stronger than your opponent, and then having, the ability to get things done with a dual threat quarterback was huge. And so JT, I would kind of liken a Saquon, not on that level, but obviously very good, explosive. So you kind of see the vision if you really, really, really squint your eyes in Indianapolis. I mean, really squinting because it's rough right now. But I do think, Jim, that is ideally what the Colts would like their offense to look like, where we're able to kind of beat you in multiple ways, but we lean heavily on the run game, which is what got them, I believe, to the Super Bowl in the first place. Then obviously Jalen Hurts, who now has two of the best performances you've ever seen in the Super Bowl.
Yes.
Yeah, he's vindicated. It was awesome to see that. So I can't hate from that perspective. Yes, I want to see history, but I mean, I'm never going to feel bad for, the Chiefs. That's not something I can genuinely say.
I feel bad for me. I feel bad for me. That's
the game
all
was boring, but as my dad always said, it's only boring because you picked the wrong team. Because if the Chiefs were up by that much, I'd probably be saying like, yeah, it was great. So, it's one of those things. It was tough.
That's fair. I'm with you, man. Like I said, on the way that I think the Colts and Shane Steichen has very familiar with the way that Eagles offense is built and what makes Jalen Hurts tick and what makes him special in certain situations, especially. Like, I would be doing everything in my power to try to make the Colts offense look and feel like the way the Eagles offense can. And again, obviously they don't have quite the offensive line or quite the weapons that the Eagles do, but man, the way this thing works, the amount of pressure it takes off Jalen Hurts, and then asking him to make those big throws when he does. That's obviously something special that Jalen Hurts can do, and hopefully Richardson can be that kind of player at one point in his career. But in terms of limiting the amount of responsibility you put on the quarterback, yeah, that is something I would be interested in if I were Shane Steichen. So watching the Eagles win a championship, I would hope for Shane Steichen was inspirational.
Exactly. So like I said, we'll catch up with those guys pretty soon. We'll check back in next week as well. I have some stories I'm working on. I won't give too much away now because, to be completely honest, they're kind of fluid. It's like I got to figure out what I'm going to write, how I'm going to write it. But look forward to more off-season thinking and just looking ahead at what could be, what couldn't be, those sorts of things. So thank you all for listening, and until next time.